The clinic in Yavindale was quiet as usual, its sterile white walls and faint hum of machinery offering a sense of calm to anyone who entered. Dr. Reelan had just finished organizing patient files for the day, ready to close up when the automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. He looked up, expecting to see a latecomer from the town, but his breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. A woman stepped inside, her figure shrouded in a shimmering cloak that seemed to ripple with faint light, as though it were alive. She paused, her glowing green eyes scanning the room before locking onto his. Her skin was an iridescent lavender, and her hair, silver and flowing like liquid moonlight, framed her face in a way that made her seem otherworldly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice melodic yet tinged with unease. "Are you the one called Reelan?" He blinked, momentarily stunned. Yes. I'm Dr. Reelan. How can I help you?" She stepped closer, her movements graceful but deliberate. "I am Silvara," she began, her tone soft but urgent. "I am not from this world. I come seeking help. A matter of life and death for my people." Reelan's initial shock gave way to curiosity and concern. He gestured toward the nearest chair. "Please, sit down. Tell me what's going on." Silvara hesitated for a moment before lowering herself into the seat. Her posture was upright, almost regal, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her movements. "My species, the Irani, are facing a dire crisis. Our ability to reproduce has been compromised. Without a solution, we face extinction within a generation." Reelan frowned, his medical instincts kicking in. "That sounds serious. But why come to Earth? What can humans do?" She looked at him, her emerald eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Your species possesses a unique biological resilience. Your genetic structure could hold the key to restoring balance to our reproductive process. My council sent me here to seek a solution." He leaned back, processing her words. The idea was extraordinary, almost unbelievable, but there was something about her presence, her sincerity, that made him believe her. "All right," he said cautiously. "Let's start with the basics. I'll need to understand your physiology and the nature of the problem." Silvara nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you, Reelan. Your willingness to help means more than I can express." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, spherical device that glowed faintly. Placing it on the desk, she tapped its surface, and a holographic projection appeared. The intricate image displayed what he assumed was Irani anatomy. Complex, web-like structures that pulse with energy. "This is our core reproductive system," she explained, pointing to the glowing network. "It functions through a delicate exchange of biological energy between partners. But something has disrupted this process. The energy flow has weakened, and our offspring are no longer viable." Reelan studied the projection, his analytical mind already racing. "This looks similar to some cellular systems in Earth biology, but the energy aspect is new to me. I'll need to run some tests to compare." Silvara hesitated, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I understand, but I must warn you, our biology is sensitive. Any invasive procedures could cause harm." "I'll be as careful as possible," he assured her. "But I'll need your cooperation. Blood samples, cellular scans, nothing painful, I promise." She nodded, relaxing slightly. "I trust you." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. He wasn't used to patients expressing such open trust, let alone one from another world. They began immediately, working late into the night. Silvara allowed him to take a small blood sample, her lavender skin barely flinching as the needle pierced it. The blood itself was unlike anything he'd seen. Shimmering with faint luminescence, it seemed almost alive. "This is incredible," he murmured, examining the sample under a microscope. "Your cells are more complex than anything on Earth. It's like they're designed to interact with energy on a molecular level." Silvara watched him closely, her gaze steady but curious. "Is that good?" "It's fascinating," he said, glancing at her with a small smile. But it also means this won't be a simple fix. I'll need time to study this properly. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Take the time you need. I'll stay nearby. You'll need somewhere to rest, he said, realizing she'd likely traveled a great distance to reach him. There's a small guest room at the clinic. It's not much, but you're welcome to use it. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Thank you, Reelan. Your kindness is unexpected. It's just common decency, he replied, though he couldn't deny the warmth her gratitude stirred in him. Over the next few days, they settled into a rhythm. Reelan spent hours analyzing Silvara's samples and comparing them to human biology, while she assisted by providing more information about her species. She used a holographic device to explain Irani physiology in detail, her explanations always precise but tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. You humans are remarkable, she remarked one evening as they reviewed his findings. Your ability to adapt, to survive, it's unlike anything I've encountered. Reelan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. You make it sound like we're special. We're just trying to make it through the day, like everyone else. Silvara tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light. Perhaps, but there's a strength in your simplicity, a resilience that my people have lost. Her words struck a chord, but he brushed it off, focusing instead on the data in front of him. We'll figure this out, he said firmly. I just need more time. Time, however, seemed to blur as their work continued. Silvara's presence became a constant in Reelan's life, her calm demeanor and sharp intellect a steadying influence. But beneath her composed exterior, he could sense a vulnerability, a weight she carried silently. One evening, as they sat in the clinic's small garden, Silvara broke the silence. Reelan, do you think it's possible for two species as different as ours to truly understand each other? He glanced at her, surprised by the question. I think understanding comes from effort, not similarity. If we're willing to listen, to learn anything's possible. She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. Your optimism is refreshing. It's not just optimism, he said, leaning forward. It's faith. In people, in connections, even across galaxies. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. Their work continued late into the night, their conversations becoming more personal with each passing day. Reelan found himself drawn to Silvara's quiet strength and the way she carried herself with grace despite the weight of her mission. One night, as they reviewed another round of test results, Silvara placed a hand on his arm, stopping him mid-sentence. Reelan, she said softly, her emerald eyes locking onto his. Thank you for everything. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat as her hand lingered, her touch cool but soothing. You don't have to thank me, he said finally. I'm just doing my job. No, she said, her voice almost a whisper. You're doing more than that. You're giving me hope. The tension between them lingered, a subtle but undeniable shift in the air. As they returned to their work, Reelan found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Silvara's presence, once simply intriguing, now seemed to weigh on him in a way he couldn't explain. Her every word, every movement, seemed to resonate deeper than it should. The days passed in a blur of experiments and analysis. Reelan made steady progress, identifying key differences in Irani biology and isolating potential solutions. Yet, for all his scientific breakthroughs, his thoughts continued to drift back to Silvara, her elegance, her determination, and the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. One evening, as they sat together in the clinic's modest lab, reviewing another set of data, Silvara's voice broke the silence. Reelan, she began, her tone hesitant, I've been meaning to ask you something. He looked up from his notes, meeting her gaze. What is it? She hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. You've been so kind to me, so willing to help. But I wonder why. Why would you care about the fate of a species that isn't your own? Reelan leaned back in his chair, considering her question. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Because life, any life, is worth fighting for. Her expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, he replied with a small smile. Sometimes, we just have to trust that helping others is its own reward. Silvara's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. Your people are remarkable, Reelan. You are remarkable. He felt his cheeks warm at her words, but before he could respond, she stood abruptly, her movements almost too fluid. I need some air, she said quickly, turning toward the door. Do you want company? He offered, standing as well. She paused, her back to him. No, thank you. I just need a moment. He watched her go, a mix of concern and confusion swirling in his chest. Something was clearly troubling her, but he wasn't sure how to approach it. As the clinic door slid shut behind her, Reelan sat back down, his thoughts racing. He couldn't deny the growing connection he felt with Silvara, but he also couldn't ignore the enormity of their differences. She was an alien, quite literally from another world. What kind of future could they possibly have? The next morning, Silvara returned to the lab with a renewed sense of purpose. If the previous night had unsettled her, she showed no sign of it now. She threw herself into their work with an intensity that left Reelan scrambling to keep up. This compound, she said, pointing to one of the chemical structures on the holographic display. It mimics the energy flow in our reproductive system. Could it be used to stabilize the process? Reelan leaned in, studying the projection. It's possible, he said slowly, but we need a way to integrate it into your biology without causing a reaction. She nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Perhaps a controlled infusion, something gradual, to allow my system to adapt. It's worth a shot, he agreed, his own excitement building. They worked tirelessly, refining the formula and testing it against samples of Silvara's cells. Progress was slow, but the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. One evening, as they reviewed their latest results, Silvara spoke up again. Reelan, if this works, if we succeed, I'll owe you a debt I can never repay. He shook his head, meeting her gaze. You don't owe me anything, Silvara. This is about saving your people, not about debts. Her expression softened, and for a moment, he thought she might argue. But instead, she reached out, her hand brushing against his. Thank you, she said softly. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver down his spine, and for a moment, the room seemed to fade away. All he could see was her glowing green eyes, her serene yet intense expression. Silvara, he began, but the words caught in his throat. She pulled her hand back, her cheeks glowing faintly. We should focus on the work, she said quickly, her tone almost apologetic. Right, he said, forcing himself to look away. But as they returned to their work, the unspoken tension between them lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. Finally, after weeks of effort, they had a breakthrough. The formula was ready for testing, and Silvara volunteered to be the first subject. Are you sure about this? Reelan asked, his concern evident. We're still in uncharted territory here. She nodded firmly. I trust you, Reelan. If anyone can make this work, it's you. Her faith in him was both humbling and terrifying, but he pushed his doubts aside and prepared the infusion. As he administered the formula, he watched her closely, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Silvara closed her eyes, her breathing steady as the substance entered her system. For a moment, nothing happened, but then a faint glow began to emanate from her skin, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. It's working, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Reelan exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We'll need to monitor you closely, but this is a good sign. She opened her eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something in her gaze that took his breath away. Hope. Thank you, Reelan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You've given me a chance I thought I'd never have. He smiled, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're getting there. As they continued to monitor her progress, the bond between them deepened. Silvara's gratitude and trust were evident in every interaction, and Reelan found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. Late one night, as they sat together in the clinic's garden, Silvara broke the silence once again. "Reelan," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the stars above. "If this works, if my people are saved, I don't know if I'll ever be able to leave this world." He turned to her, his brow furrowing. "Why not?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. "Because of you." Her words hit him like a freight train, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. "Silvara, he began, but she silenced him with a gentle touch. "I don't expect anything from you," she said quietly, "but I needed you to know. You've become more than just a healer to me." His heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, and before he could stop himself, he reached out, taking her hand in his. "You're more than just a patient to me, Silvara," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. For the first time in his life, Reelan found himself completely at a loss for words. But as Silvara leaned closer, her glowing eyes searching his, he realized that no words were needed. Silvara's gaze held Reelan's with an intensity that left him rooted to the spot. The glow in her emerald eyes seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, mirroring the rapid thrum of his heart. Her hand, cool yet comforting, remained in his, their connection more profound than anything he'd experienced before. As she leaned in, her movements deliberate and unhurried, the space between them seemed to shrink until there was nothing left. Reelan hesitated, the logical part of his mind screaming about boundaries, about professionalism, but there was no denying the magnetic pull between them, a force stronger than reason or fear. When her lips met his, it was like stepping into a world without gravity. The kiss was soft, exploratory, yet it carried a weight that made him feel as if the universe had narrowed to just the two of them. Her scent, a mix of something floral and alien, wrapped around him, and he deepened the kiss instinctively, his hand moving to her cheek. Her skin was smooth, warmer now, radiating an energy that felt almost alive. Silvara pulled back slightly, her breath mingling with his as she looked at him with a vulnerability that shattered any remaining barriers in his heart. "I shouldn't have done that," she murmured, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "No," Reelan said, his voice firm but gentle. "You shouldn't apologize for something that felt right." She smiled faintly, her glowing cheeks a testament to her flustered state. "This is dangerous, Reelan. For both of us." He nodded, understanding the truth in her words, but unwilling to dismiss what had just happened. Dangerous doesn't mean wrong. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their connection settling over them. The night air was cool, the stars above twinkling like distant witnesses to their unspoken promises. "Reelan," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his, "if this is too much, if you feel this complicates things—" "I don't," he interrupted, his voice steady. "This isn't something I can ignore, Silvara. And I don't think you can either." Her eyes searched his, and slowly she nodded. "No, I can't. But I'm afraid of what this means. For you, for me, for everything we're trying to accomplish." "Then we figure it out," Reelan said, his determination clear. Together, Silvara exhaled a shaky breath, her expression softening. "You're impossible, you know that?" "I've been told," he said with a small smile, earning a quiet laugh from her. In the days that followed, their work continued with renewed vigor, but the dynamic between them had shifted. They moved more closely now, their interactions laced with an unspoken understanding. The moments they stole together, shared glances, fleeting touches, were both exhilarating and terrifying. One afternoon, While reviewing the latest data on Silvara's condition, she placed a hand on Reeland's arm, stopping him mid-sentence. "Reeland, there's something I need to tell you." He turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" She hesitated, her expression troubled. "The council, they're monitoring my progress. If they sense that my bond with you has deepened, they may intervene." Reeland's brow furrowed. "Intervene how?" "They could recall me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or worse, they could decide that continuing this experiment is too risky." The thought of losing her, of their work being halted, filled Reeland with a surge of protectiveness. "Then we don't let them find out," he said firmly. "We keep this between us." Silvara's eyes softened, gratitude shining in their depths. "You're willing to risk so much for me. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," he said, his voice earnest. "This isn't about debts, Silvara. It's about what's right." She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing against his. "You have no idea how much that means to me." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, their connection deepening in ways neither of them had anticipated. The formula they had developed was working, stabilizing Silvara's system and paving the way for her to fulfill her species' most vital need. But as her condition improved, the reality of their situation became harder to ignore. One evening, as they sat in the clinic's garden once more, Silvara spoke up, her voice tinged with melancholy. "Reeland, what happens when this is over? When my people no longer need me to represent them here?" He looked at her, his heart aching at the thought of her leaving. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that I don't want us, to end." Her expression was a mix of hope and sorrow. "Neither do I. But our worlds are so different. How can we make this work?" "We'll find a way," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "No matter what it takes." Silvara smiled, her hand reaching for his. "You make me believe that's possible." As they sat together under the stars, the challenges ahead seemed distant, their shared resolve stronger than ever. But deep down, they both knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. In the following weeks, the urgency of Silvara's condition took precedence over everything else. The formula Reeland had developed was proving to be a groundbreaking success. Silvara's health improved dramatically, her once weakened frame now vibrant with strength. The glow in her skin was no longer faint. It radiated a steady, ethereal warmth, a testament to the harmony achieved within her body. Their bond grew stronger with every breakthrough. Reeland had never felt so connected to another being. Silvara, in turn, found herself deeply moved by his relentless determination and compassion. Their moments of stolen intimacy became a source of solace amidst the pressure, yet neither could ignore the looming shadow of the alien council. One morning, as Silvara conducted a routine check of her vital signs in the clinic, the room was filled with a sharp, chiming tone. She froze, her hand hovering over the console. The sound was unmistakable, a signal from her people. Reeland looked up from his notes, noticing her sudden stillness. "Silvara, what is it?" She turned toward him, her expression grave. "The council is reaching out. They've noticed the changes in my condition." His stomach dropped. "Do they know about us?" "No," she said quickly, though her voice wavered. "But they're demanding an update. They want to assess whether the experiment is worth continuing." Reeland stepped closer, his protective instincts flaring. "What does that mean for you?" "For us." Silvara hesitated, her hands clenching at her sides. "If they decide I've deviated from their expectations, they'll recall me. Or worse, they could terminate the experiment entirely, including all progress made here." The implication was clear. If the council deemed their work a failure, it could jeopardize not only Silvara's life, but Reeland's career and everything they'd achieved together. "Then we don't give them a reason to doubt," Reeland said firmly. "We present the progress, focus on the medical breakthroughs. We don't let them see anything they can question." Silvara met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with both fear and trust. You're right. We'll face this together. When the council's holographic communication came through later that day, the room was bathed in a cold blue light. The figures of the counselors materialized. A group of imposing alien beings with elongated features and luminous robes that marked their authority. Silvara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. Honored Council, I bring you positive news. The Earth physician Reelan has succeeded in stabilizing my systems. My vitality has been restored, and the breeding process is progressing as intended. The counselors exchanged unreadable glances before one of them, a tall figure with a deep, resonant voice, spoke. This progress is encouraging, Silvara. However, we must evaluate the methods used. Are there any complications to report? Silvara hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Reelan felt his breath hitch. No complications, she said smoothly. The process has been effective due to a combination of Earth resources and this medic's expertise. The partnership has proven invaluable. The counselor's glowing eyes shifted toward Reelan. Human, the voice boomed, you have served your purpose admirably. But we must remind you, Silvara is not to be compromised in any way that deviates from the mission. Her role is vital to our species. Reelan nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. Understood. My focus is solely on ensuring her health and the success of your initiative. The council seemed placated, but the tension lingered long after the transmission ended. As the holographic figures dissipated, Silvara turned to Reelan, her shoulders sagging in relief. That was too close. They're suspicious, Reelan said, his brow furrowing. We need to be more careful. Silvara nodded, her expression troubled. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe. But I don't know how long we can keep this hidden. That night, as they sat together in the clinic's quiet garden, the weight of the day's events pressed heavily on them. Silvara leaned against Reelan, her head resting on his shoulder. I wish things were different, she whispered. So do I, he replied, his voice soft but firm. But we'll make the most of what we have. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. You've given me something I didn't think was possible, Reelan. Hope. He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of her luminous hair behind her ear. And you've given me purpose. Their lips met in a tender kiss, the night around them falling away as they clung to the fragile, fleeting moments of connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The following weeks brought both triumph and uncertainty. Silvara's condition stabilized further, and signs of a successful reproductive process began to emerge, a milestone that marked a turning point in the experiment. But with progress came increased scrutiny from the council. Late one evening, Silvara approached Reelan with a troubled expression. I've been summoned to a council meeting on my homeworld, she said. They want to evaluate me in person. Reelan felt a jolt of panic. What does that mean for you? For us? I don't know, she admitted, but I fear they may be looking for a reason to end this. Then we won't let that happen, Reelan said, his resolve unwavering. We've come too far to lose everything now. Silvara's gaze softened, and she reached for his hand. Reelan, if something happens, if they don't let me return, I need you to promise me you'll continue the work. The formula, the research, it could help so many. You're not going anywhere without a fight, he said firmly. I'll find a way to bring you back. As Silvara prepared for her departure, the weight of their unspoken fears hung heavy between them. But beneath the uncertainty was a shared determination to defy the odds, to protect the fragile bond they had forged against all logic and reason. When the day came for her to leave, Reelan stood by her side, his heart aching with the knowledge that their future was far from certain. Promise me you'll come back, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I promise, Silvara replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. No matter what it takes. As she stepped onto the shimmering transport platform, her form gradually dissolved into light, leaving Reelan alone in the cold, sterile room. But even as the emptiness settled around him, He held on to the belief that their story was far from over. Weeks passed without any word from Silvara, and each day felt like an eternity for Reelan. He threw himself into his work, refining the formula and compiling all the research they had gathered. The clinic became both a refuge and a reminder of her absence, and every corner of it seemed to echo with her presence. Then, one late evening, as Reelan was going through the day's reports, a familiar chiming tone filled the room. It was a signal from Silvara's species. His heart raced as he activated the console. The holographic projection that emerged wasn't the council. It was Silvara. She looked radiant, her skin glowing brighter than ever, and her expression was a mix of relief and joy. "Reelan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm coming back." The weight he had been carrying lifted instantly. "Silvara, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay," she said, her voice steadying. "The council reviewed the results of our work. They couldn't deny the success. The offspring are developing perfectly. They've decided to continue the program, and they've given me permission to return to Earth." Reelan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "They're letting you come back?" "Yes," she replied, smiling. "On one condition. We must maintain our focus on the breeding initiative. They want periodic updates and progress reports." He nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "That's something we can manage." Silvara's projection leaned closer, as if trying to close the distance between them. "Reelan, I fought for this. I fought for us. The council doesn't know the full truth, but they see the value of our partnership. And that's enough for now." A few days later, Silvara arrived at the clinic, stepping off the same shimmering transport platform she had left from. Reelan was there to greet her, his heart pounding with anticipation. When their eyes met, the space between them seemed to disappear, and he pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You're really here," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you I'd come back," she replied, her voice soft but firm. Their reunion was marked by a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they continued their work, blending Earth's medical advancements with the knowledge of Silvara's species. The offspring's development progressed smoothly, a testament to their combined efforts. Over time, Silvara and Reelan's relationship deepened, transcending the boundaries of their respective worlds. Their bond was a testament to the power of understanding and collaboration, a beacon of hope for what could be achieved when differences were embraced rather than feared. The council, while still watchful, grew more lenient as the success of the program became undeniable. Silvara and Reelan's work began to inspire new dialogues between Earth and the alien race, fostering a tentative but growing sense of cooperation. One evening, as they sat together in the clinic's garden under the starlit sky, Silvara turned to Reelan, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and love. "Do you ever think about what brought us here?" she asked. He smiled, taking her hand in his. "All the time. It's incredible how something so unlikely became the most important thing in my life." She leaned against him, her voice soft. "You gave me more than a cure, Reelan. You gave me hope, strength, and a reason to fight for my future. And you gave me something I never thought I'd find," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You made me see the world in a completely new way." As they sat there, surrounded by the gentle hum of Earth's life and the distant echoes of a universe filled with endless possibilities, they knew that their journey was far from over. Together, they had defied the odds and built a bridge between their worlds, a foundation for a future where love and unity could thrive against all odds. And in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of stars, they knew they had found something timeless, a connection that would endure no matter what challenges lay ahead.